Hello again. I am in yet another random hotel room. Sorry for the bizarre lighting. I am going to review the Moza Air gimbal today. First of all, the basic stats of the gimbal. It accepts a camera that weighs up to 5.5 pounds. It has an 8-hour battery life, and it can be used with an optional wireless thumb controller, which has a bunch of features. And it also has advanced motion time lapse, which is something that I don't know too much about, but in a future video, I'm gonna have a friend of mine do a much more detailed explanation of the motion time lapse. So this video is basically just giving you my basic impressions after having used this for several days and show you a bunch of test footage. I think the test footage is by far the most important thing of any review of a gimbal. I could talk all day blue in the face, show you all the features, but the bottom line is if the gimbal doesn't keep your footage steady, there's no point in buying it. First, I'll just explain the basic ergonomics of this thing. You put your camera on here, you balance it. I'm not going to show you how to balance it because that's covered in a lot of other videos. And you can also put these mini tripod legs on the bottom. I got them with the gimbal, but I'm not sure if that's standard. Moza gave me this gimbal as a tester, so I don't know if they always give that out in the package or if you have to buy them separately, but they're pretty handy because then when you're balancing and stuff, you can just set it down like that. So right now I have on the gimbal the Sony a7S II camera. It's got the 16 to 35 millimeter f4 lens. This is the setup that I used for the test that I'm going to show you. You press this button here to turn it on, and then the gimbal comes to life. You click this little button here to change modes. Click once, and it changes to the mode that just follows your pan. Click it twice, follows everything, pan and tilt. Click it 3 times and it's completely locked off and it doesn't follow anything you do. This is pretty standard for gimbals. The thumb controller is nice. It's nice and comfortable. However, the power button is way too easy to turn off by accident if you're grabbing the gimbal up a little higher. You see that blue little flashing light? This thing, I've turned it off a million times by accident while I'm using it. Also, the gimbal tends to kind of turn itself off if you use it at weird angles that stress the motor too much sometimes. I haven't found any real pattern or regularity to that, but it's a problem that I encountered sort of randomly as I was using the gimbal throughout long days of shooting. So be aware of that. It's not a very prevalent problem. It's not something that happened very often, but it did happen to me a few times throughout a 10-day shoot. So this gimbal does have a dual handle configuration, which can really help if you like to use an external monitor or if you just want the extra feeling of stability of using the 2 handles. But I'm not really even going to go into that because I don't use them. They took extra time to set up, and in my experience, they don't really make the shots any steadier. They just make it more comfortable to hold. And I tend to be moving really fast when I'm shooting. Like I'll take it out of my bag and I'll want to just shoot with it right away. So I don't want to take the extra time to do the dual handle setup, and I don't use an external monitor for that same reason. I haven't found a single setup with an external monitor yet that allows me to move as freely and as fluidly between positions as I want. So another thing about this gimbal, you can only put the motor on the right side of the camera. You can't put the motor on the left side. So why does that matter? Well, if you're using a Sony mirrorless like the a7S or the a7R2 or the A9 or the a6500, the battery and the memory card are on the right, which in this current configuration is blocked by the motor. So with the a7S II, that just means that I have to remove the camera from the gimbal if I want to change out my battery. With the a6500, it means that if I want to change the SD card or the battery, I have to remove the camera from the gimbal. With the a7S, I can remove the SD card still. I just open up the SD card slot here. I take the SD card out. I don't have to take the camera off the gimbal for that. I'd much prefer to have it be switchable like that. Another minor ergonomic issue here, I found the knobs that you use to tighten and loosen the arms here for balance to be sort of uncomfortable to use. And after a full day of trying to wrench them open and then tighten them again, I felt like my thumb was going to fall off right at this joint here. It was just really uncomfortable. I don't know if that's just me or if that's for everybody who uses it, but yeah, that wasn't too great. But it's great that you don't have to use a tool. I mean, I'd much prefer uncomfortable knobs to having to actually pull out, an Allen key or something and loosen it up like you used to have to do with the old gimbals. And I have not been able to find a quick release plate to put here that doesn't cause motor vibrations with this particular setup, the a7S II and the 16-35mm lens. Your results will vary depending on the lens and the camera you're using. Sometimes if you have the right configuration of camera, lens, and quick release plate, you'll be able to go scot-free and use that quick release plate without any problems whatsoever. I didn't find that to be the case with this setup. So that means for the A7S, every time I wanted to change a battery, I would have to unscrew it from the bottom here and then take it off and then change the battery, put it back on, and re-screw it and rebalance it a bit. So it's a little inconvenient. So that's pretty much it for my ergonomic gripes with that gimbal. I'm going to move on to talking about this thumb controller, which is useful, but not really useful. It's nicely designed. It's small, it fits in your hand, and it has a lot of capabilities. And one good thing is once it's been paired with the gimbal, every time you turn it on, it's automatically connected. So now all I have to do is pan on the thumb controller and the gimbal follows. That's really cool. So there's no complicated pairing process. The battery on the thumb controller seems to last forever, and it has a little indicator that tells you how much battery you have left. You can press one little button here for speed, one little button here for mode changing. So you can change the follow speed with one button. You can also change the mode that the gimbal's in with the other button. In my experience though, I've always kept the follow speed at slow because it's the only speed that seems smooth enough for the kinds of moves that I do. And as for changing the follow modes, I don't know why I would need to use a remote for that. There's a button right here, you know, click once, change, click twice, change again. The only thing is, for some weird reason, with the remote, you can change it so that it follows just your pitch. So it doesn't follow the pan, but it does follow the pitch, which is really, really useful if I'm trying to maybe keep, you know, the steeple of a church framed perfectly as I'm walking. It really helps to have the gimbal only following the pitch. You can't access that mode with the button on the gimbal. You can only access it with the mode change on the remote controller. And honestly, being able to get into that mode almost makes it worth it to purchase the thumb controller. I wish they would just program it so that the gimbal itself had a mode number 4 that was pitch follow only, but they didn't do it that way. There's one more really interesting function of this remote, which is a thing called motion control. You go start motion control, and then all of a sudden the gimbal is tracking what the remote control is doing through, I guess, an accelerometer or something. So this is a function that's very similar to what the Mimic does for the FreeFly Movi, the granddaddy of all gimbals, the most expensive gimbal. But this is kind of a beta version. This doesn't really move all that smoothly, and you can't lock off any axes. So it follows every axis all the time, and after you do a pan, it tends to just keep drifting. As you can see here, it's just drifting around and around even though I'm not moving. I mean, it's just beta. This is something that's going to be cool probably around version 3.0 or something. But as it stands now, it's not really all that useful. It's more of just a party trick. Okay, enough of me talking here about the gimbal. I'm going to go to the test footage. I apologize in advance. It's going to be kind of ugly because I'm currently on a shoot and my options for locations were a little bit limited and the lighting's kind of crappy. But it will give you a really good idea of how steady this gimbal is. Upright, inverted, walking, running, full lock, full follow, and pan follow only. So basically all the major modes, upright and inverted, you're going to see here. So what do I think overall of the Moza Air? I think actually it might be one of the best, if not the best, pistol grip gimbals on the market right now. And the reason I say that is primarily because it handles the sort of extreme angles that I like to shoot at really well. For instance, if I'm tilting down and then I'm walking and I want to tilt up smoothly and then I want to rotate and then I want to have it tilt down again. A lot of gimbals don't like that kind of movement and they'll make it kind of jittery. The Zhiyun crane actually does that quite a bit. It has jitters when I try to do those really crazy angles. This one doesn't. It doesn't like a certain angle. It doesn't like the fully lateral angle, and if you listen, you can probably hear the vibrations it's making. It doesn't like that at all. The Zhiyun crane handles this angle perfect. I mean, no gimbal is 100% perfect, but practically speaking, you don't really need to be shooting with the gimbal like this hardly ever, if ever. So most of the other crazy angles that I like to do, it handles them just fine. So, you know, I would recommend this. I say it's a great gimbal for anybody using a camera up to 5.5 pounds. I will talk a little bit more about it when I review the Zhiyun crane version 2 and the Nebula 5100 slant in the near future, so look out for those videos. So please subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I will see you very soon. Thanks.